Hey guys, it's Max. Thanks for joining me today. I have what I hope is going to be an interesting video for you guys to watch. We'll see, I guess, right? All right. All right. Name of the video is Why Do I Need to Trade Options or, buy ETFs to trade options? And the short answer is you really don't. Options are one of many choices that investors have. Let me ask you this question. Do you have enough money you could divide your money into 50 or even 100 piles of $100,000? In other words, you got 5 or 10 million. If so, congrats or more. Go to Easy Street. You have all kinds of options available to you at that point. But in the worst case scenario, you could just sell 4% of your assets the rest of your life every year and pay yourself $200,000 a year. That's the 4% rule. You could just pay yourself a salary the rest of your life and you'd be fine. If you're like a lot of people, me included, and have a middle-class type retirement with 6 figures, maybe low 7 figures saved up, you're going to need some type of passive income from your portfolio in retirement, or you're going to run out of money, in my opinion. And these are based on my experience, of course. I'm basing this on my experience. You should, of course, check all this out with your financial planner, but depending on what your needs for income are and your goals in retirement, and if you plan on leaving anything to your kids or their kids or whatever, a standard type plan may not be enough. So standard retirement strategies do work for plenty of people. 60-40 is a very standard just allocation strategy generally, not really retirement, but there's the retirement bucket strategy. There's and those work great, especially if you've done a little better than average. There's the 4% rule, which we mentioned with the guy that has 5 million. He could live off 200,000 the rest of his life, pretty much. So says the 4% rule. Doesn't always work, but I think it usually does. All right, but at the lower savings levels, you might have some hard choices to make regarding lifestyle. Okay. And even at the higher levels, you might have some higher choices to make if you just stick with standard kind of boring stocks and bond portfolio. So we're going to focus on the guy with a little less today, maybe somebody working with about 500,000. I Googled yesterday, the average retirement balance, 401k balance at retirement is about $500,000. So that's the average person. But if you use a standard retirement strategy, like let's say you use the 4% rule, you're only going to be able to pay yourself $20,000 a year. Okay. That rule works great at the higher levels, but at the lower levels, we're going to have to be more creative, and 60% stocks and 40% bonds isn't going to be creative enough. Government bonds are very conservative, but they don't pay that high of a yield. Even if you don't want to use options or learn about option ETFs, that's fine. There's other alternatives out there we're going to talk about today. One of them would be closed-end funds. A lot of people that on my channel that I've talked to in the comments have read this book, The Income Factory. Well, the author was on passive income investing with Adriano, I think, on YouTube. I would go watch this video. It's a great video. But that's closed-end funds. That's one way. They don't have anything to do with options, but it's one way of generating passive income in retirement that a lot of people have a lot of luck with. But also bonds and REITs, which are real estate investment trust, can work. So not all bonds are boring government bonds. There's also corporate bonds, and there's also junk bonds. There's riskier bonds that pay a little better. Okay, so they have different types of bond funds, and then of course a REIT is where they put together a package of real estate, and they collect the rent. A company collects the rent and pays it to you if you buy the REIT, and those can also work for passive income, and also just a plain Jane dividend ETF like SCHD that just buys dividend stocks and just holds the stocks and lets them collect dividends. That's not a bad passive income strategy either. And there's a lot of good funds that do that. So you do have some alternatives. All right, we're going to jump into the retirement simulator, and we're going to look at a dude with the 7-figure balance. Now let's do it like this. Okay, so we'll just say this on a $2 million balance. Okay, we have 4 plans here. A, C, and D are option-based plans. And, so this is $2 million right here. That's how much you could pay yourself every month. If you did plan A, $15,000 a month, that's pretty good. That's all the high yielding funds. But then you could also real safely pay yourself $5,100 a month with the safer funds. Okay. Well, portfolio B is your standard, just boring 60-40, meaning 60% SPY and 40% the ETF BND. Now you could also use the ETF AGG. They're both the same thing, but they're super safe, super boring, and super low yielding. But when you want to step outside of that territory, what we can do is we can go over here and we can look at portfolio B allocation, and we'll just forget about this 40 right here that's in bond. We'll turn that to 0. Okay, now I'm going to highlight an area and I'm going to show you our choices. So these over here, these are our choices. We want to use some kind of fixed income, REIT, fixed income, dividend growth. Okay. These are our choices, and I'm not going to include gold, but disregard gold. And the reason is because gold doesn't pay a yield. GLD has no yield. But anyway, these other ones, not that it may not have a place in a portfolio, but for the purposes of this, we're looking at how to make a passive income in retirement. So if we look over here on bond, all the way to let's do it in the column Z for safety, and then we look at the ETFs that I have highlighted. These are the choices for fixed income that I have available in the option simulator. So we have B and D, but we already talked about that. Look, it only returned about 1.8%, or about 3. It only returned about 3% last year. Its total return was only 5%. Its NAV return was only about 2%. 2 plus 3 is 5. Very boring, very safe, but very boring. Typically very safe, not all. Okay, but anyway, so then we have a REIT. We have O, and I think that may be the largest REIT. That's just called Realty Income, I believe. It's out of San Diego. I sat next to a girl on the plane that worked for that company. But anyway, they're really nice. It pays about a 6% dividend. They own a bunch of shopping malls and apartments, I think. Okay. Then we have HYG. Well, that's a high yielding corporate bonds, and they pay more than government bonds. Instead of 3, they pay 4 or 5 or 6, whatever. Then there's SRLN. That's a senior loan ETF, and that pays 7. I've heard Jay mention that one before. Jay, they use that in their wealth management business. He's mentioned that specific ETF on his podcast before. We're going to disregard gold, but then we have a closed-end fund. We have CLM. This is a very old one and a very famous one, Cornerstone, and a lot of people love this one. We could also look at that. We could also look at SPY-D. SPY-D is just the highest dividend yielding stocks out of the SPY put into an index. So instead of the SPY pays, we can just look. SPY pays a recent yield of 1.5. The SPY-D pays a recent yield of 4.9. Okay, and the SPY-D had NAV return of 23%, not as good as the SPY regular that had 33%, but that's kind of the way it goes. Anyway, so those are our choices, but my favorite metric to look at out of all these metrics is Z, because I don't like a lot of risk. And we can see, and really on Z, if you look at the whole column, I do an average. The average is 1. And so anything that has a color on it is a little bit above average. Anything that's a positive number is really above average. But anyway, bond has a 0. Okay, well, and O really has a 0. HYG has a 1. SRLN has a 0. But CLM has a 15. SPY-D has an 8. And SCHD has a 6. They're the highest ranked in that category. So and then HYG at least is average. So wonder if we put, instead of 40% in B and D, we're going to go 10% in these 4 funds. So we'll go 10% in HYG. We didn't talk about TLT, but it didn't rank very high. We'll go 10% in CLM. CLM actually ranks as high on risk-adjusted reward as some of the covered call funds, but we're avoiding the covered call funds today. These are standard fixed income stuff. Okay, so look at this guy, and all of a sudden, guy B right there improves his monthly payment from 2,700. It's 2,700 with 60/40 stocks and bonds. I have it memorized. Well, he just about doubled his monthly, doubled about what he makes after taxes a month. He's going to bring about 83 a year with that allocation. And he still has 60% growth, 60% stock. So even in retirement, if somebody would have done this last year and had 2 million a year ago today, right now their NAV would be worth 2.5. And that includes the after-tax income, which is $60,000. But in any event, so they made $60,000 in cash, about $5,000 a month, and their NAV went up $500,000 because these are good funds. And remember, on the max factor, the Z max factor is the safety one. Y is for YOLO. That's the YOLO factor, and Z is for safety. But in any event, so that'd be a really nice way to do it. And that'd be an alternative. You don't have to use options, but you have the same results as this guy who's using NVDY, NFLP. This guy also has CLM, but AMZP, that's the Curve Amazon fund. This has SCHD in it. This fund right here just chose the 10 safest funds, regardless of if they're options or whatever, and put them in an allocation. In any event, it's about the same difference. Just to go out here and get you a little HYG, high yield corporate. That's a good one. A little CLM, Cornerstone, a little SPY-D, and a little SCHD. That's the Schwab one. That's a great one. Look at SCHD. Look what it did last year. It did, it paid a 4% dividend. Okay, it's not a lot, but hell, it got 20% upside. So about 24% total return. I mean, worse things could happen. Dividend could be higher, but it gets plenty, it gets a lot of upside. So, all right, so let's do this. Let's go back over here. All right, so strategies A, C, and D work if you're comfortable with options, right? But you could use Plan B, and like I mentioned, Plan B paid 2,700 with just 60/40 stocks, government bonds. But you do something a little bit more creative with some high yield corporates and some real estate. Yeah, we didn't use CRLN because it didn't rank high enough on the max factor, but we could have. I mean, the max factor changes all the time. The max factor doesn't predict what's going to happen next year. Next year's SRLN may be the best one to use. Who knows? But and don't forget closed-end funds like Cornerstone could work. So we put together, portfolio, no options that makes about the same, makes similar type of money to one with options, right? Okay, but now let's talk about the dude with the average dude, the middle class person. If you have less capital, you're trying to get a little bit more income out of less capital, you're going to have to probably get comfortable with some of the alternative investments. Covered calls are hot right now, and I happen to have some knowledge on options, and so that's why my station focuses pretty much exclusively on the covered call funds. But it doesn't mean there's not a lot of great other ideas out there for passive income. Like I said, to reiterate, I would say closed-end funds and REITs are probably the two best ones I can come with off the top of my head. I just never worked in commercial real estate, and I don't have as much knowledge on REITs as I do on options. So that's why I'm going to keep sticking with options. Doesn't matter. It doesn't mean it's the only show in town, of course. This is the golden age of retail investing of all types, all right? Not just option trading, but even stuff like this, even allocating portfolios. All right, so let's get back in the sim. Let's do it with an average bankroll. Okay, so here is average Joe. So we're going to switch this from 2 to 500,000. Now, I can tell you, I don't want to switch it back and forth. The standard 60-40, just stocks and government bonds, B and D or AGG, does really poorly. It's about 600. So it does 600. So you aren't going to live off 600 a month, not even close. So 60-40 is not even going to be an option. And not even if you flip-flopped it and made it 40-60 or 30-70. So you're going to need to be more creative, in my opinion, based on my experience. But the idea we just used for the dude with 2 million, you know, the 10% in the little higher yielding ones, HYG, CLM, SPY-D, and SCHD, and there's other ones too. I mean, there's thousands of funds out there. These are just some of the ones that I have in my retirement simulator. I'm sure there's better ones. I mean, I know that I'll get tons of comments. Hey, there's one a lot better, and that's great if you know that. Substitute your own in there for that, but I'm trying to teach you guys the principle. So we could do the same thing with the $500,000 dude. So what that, if he would have done that a year ago, done something like that, right now his balance would be at 636. So he's still got plenty of upside. Made himself $20,000 income, which is $15,000 after taxes. Really, he may be in a little bit lower tax bracket if he really, you know, we could maybe work on the taxes. But in any event, you know, it's not a lot of money in retirement. It's about double what he would have had. All right. Now, of course, if a guy like this was comfortable with options, you know, he could do a high risk option portfolio, give himself some, you know, a little bit of erosion, decay, and whatever, you know, just 3%. So it's under the 4% magic number, but give himself a little bit of that and make about $3,800 a month. And there's a bunch of people out there on the internet that I read, they see their portfolios all the time that are in this situation, that are doing stuff like this and killing it and making $3,000 or $4,000 a month on a smaller portfolio and $5,000 a month. That's awesome. That's awesome, right? And then the safe yield benchmark does about the same as the other allocation. So B and C are similar. And D is kind of D's my favorite 3 ETF allocation. I've already had some content about it, but I just like to put it up here to compare. But to be fair, my little favorite 3 ETF allocation over this past year did not do as well as your standard, is the one we just built with the 60% SPY and then the 40% in the government bonds and REITs and stuff. It didn't do as well as that. I mean, but it did better than the other 2 portfolios. So there's nothing wrong with the little tactical portfolio also. The tactical portfolio also gives you a little bit more after taxable income than portfolios B and C, because the tactical portfolio uses 20% SVOL and 10% ZVOL, and they pay pretty high. Okay. And generally that wouldn't be smart to use that much of them, but this XVOL has a built-in hedge in it that I think is enough to hedge all 3 of these for the most part. So I think this is a great 3 ETF portfolio. I've already had content on it anyway. So we'll just keep it up there for comparison purposes. But anyway, you can see if you have $500,000, that's great. 400,000, that's great. That's awesome. Just going to have to be a little more creative than just, you just can't go buy government bonds, or you can't use the 4% rule. So you're going to have to step up and take a little more risk, squeeze a little bit harder if you're trying to get more out of less, like a lot of us are. There's nothing wrong with ETFs that don't trade options, of course. There's plenty of good ones out there. So CLM, the cornerstone one I talked about, SCHD, SPY-D are ones that come to mind. What about RISR, RISR? There's lots of them, okay? For now, I'm going to stick to talking about ETFs that do trade options. Go watch Adrian's Passive Income Investing Masterclass on Closed-End Funds, where he talks to Mr. Bavaria, the author of that wonderful book. Keep watching my channel if you like retirement simulator content and option content. We're going to get back to option ETFs, but I just don't want to ignore just standard Fixed income is fixed income. It doesn't matter if it's a bond or if it's a covered call fund, if it's a REIT, it's a similar type deal. You're in any of those investments, you aren't going to get as much future upside. Just by definition, income investments don't do as well on NAV appreciation. But you're the only reason you buy those types of investments is for the steady stream of income. Or maybe even if it's not steady, maybe a large stream of income. With some of the yield max funds, you wouldn't really say steady on some of them, but you'd say large. So, I mean, it depends on what your needs are in retirement. The reason I built the retirement simulators, I wanted to see just how hard a person could go in yield max without just eroding, decaying, and, without eroding their account to death. That's why I made the debt factor. The debt factor corresponds directly with the 4% rule, which says you could sell 4% of your stock in retirement and live indefinitely off that. Well, all the debt factor is when you do options, you aren't selling 4% of your stock. However, the debt factor figures out because you are synthetically selling some of your stock, because when you're trading upside so the debt factor figures out how much stock you've synthetically sold, even if you still have all your shares. In other words, it figures out how much depletion you've suffered that was not accounted for by option income. All right. It's just easy. It's just pluses and minuses. Also, remember, the retirement simulator is not looking forward. It's looking backwards. It shows us how a person would have done over the past year. We're just using it to get general ideas. If next year is like this year, you might expect something similar. Okay. But that's about as far as that goes. And remember, this content is based on my personal experience. I used to be a planner, but that was years ago, and a bunch of stuff has changed. Right? When I was a planner, the BlackBerry was just getting invented and no one had one. I mean, so it was a long time ago. When I was a planner, when you bought stocks, you were still buying them in fractions. You would call up and you would buy a stock at, 31 3/16. So anyway, a lot's changed. Also, commissions were $50 or $100, even for small transactions. So the whole world's opened up. That's why I'm so excited about this. That's why I say it's the golden age of investing. It's not only the cheap commissions, but that's damn sure part of it. But it's also all the liquidity, and it's also all the knowledge, the wealth of knowledge we have out there now, where individuals can either buy ETFs that trade like hedge funds and use sophisticated strategies, like Alti and like a lot of these, or they can do it themselves. The information's out there. That wasn't the case 30 years ago when I was in wealth management. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate you all for being here. I hope you like this video. Leave me a message in the comment and let me know what your favorite retirement plan is or something. I don't know. And I'm not trying to dog on buckets or 60-40 or any other. There's lots of good retirement plans out there. I'm just saying they work better when you have more money. I guess that's how everything is, right? All right. See ya.